RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast, where we build machines.
Hello and welcome to episode 62 of the Rugby Renegade Podcast. My name is Jamie Bain and today I interview Dave O'Sullivan, an experienced physiotherapist who has worked in both league and union and draws on his experiences in 2 World Cups, again both in league and union, most recently the 2019 World Cup with England. Obviously tons that we can take from that, but he also talks a lot about injury prevention and return to play. So give it a listen and let us know what you think. Hi Dave, welcome to Rugby Renegade Podcast. Great to have you on. Let's start by you telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into physiotherapy and who are the teams and sports and things you've worked in and with.
Yeah, thanks Jamie. Great to be here. I started in physio, I suppose, as most physios, seeing the physio on the football pitch and going, oh, that looks pretty good. I'd love to try that. Decided in kind of the last couple of years of school that I was going to be a physio. Wasn't smart enough to get straight into physio in Ireland, so I had to go up to Carlow, do 2 years in physiology and health science, and then I went over to Huddersfield in the UK to study. That's kind of where my career in sport, I suppose, started really. I'd done a placement with Elite Rhinos unofficially, in a placement with Bradford Bulls Rugby League, and then ended up getting a job with Leeds Rhinos and / kind of Yorkshire Carnegie, or Leeds Carnegie they were called at the time. Worked with them for about 4 years, and then went back to Ireland to work with Munster Rugby for a year. At the time, my wife, now my girlfriend at the time, and Ava, my daughter, who was 2 at the time, they stayed back in Huddersfield. So it was kind of it was kind of a short-term thing, really, unfortunately. But so I moved back to Huddersfield, where I was living at the time, or she was living, and took up their head of physio role. Done that for about 3 years, and then just kind of had enough of I suppose the day-to-day professional sport side of it. So then kind of went a lot on the online route, started mentoring physios alongside building my private practice up, and then got involved with England Rugby League in 2017 for their Rugby League World Cup. And then I've been very fortunate to get involved with England Rugby Union in 2019, and been fortunate to be out in Japan with them for their World Cup as well. So that's kind of my journey to date.
Yeah, cool. Well, tons of experience, and we'll try and pull on all of that as we go through the podcast. And you spoke about the World Cup, and it's one of the questions, so I'm going to jump down to it now. Obviously, it's a particular challenge in a World Cup because of the kind of the high volume of playing in a short period of time. How do you kind of manage the squad, and how do you overcome those sort of issues?
Yeah, I think they were probably 2 very different World Cups in terms of setups. So will we talk about Rugby Union?
Talk about both. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear your experience in both.
Yeah, so the Rugby League, it's a bit of a smaller squad, so a lot less staff. So it's kind of the same principles of like recovery is very, very important. Rain on the coaches in terms of training loads and stuff like that. I think that's pretty similar in both codes. Whereas I think in the Rugby Union we were very, very lucky with England. You know, we had everything we needed. We had a really good medical team, and the medical and S&C worked really well together in terms of recovery and what they were doing in the gym, pre-ab. You know, what we were doing in the physio room. I think everything complemented everything, which I think is really important in Japan. So. I think in Japan it was, as I said, we were very, very fortunate to have a lot of good stuff, and the logistics team helped us out a lot as well, in getting like really good hotels with good recovery facilities and stuff like that. So I'd like to think the players were well looked after in Japan, and in Australia with the Rugby League. Probably didn't have as much resources available to us, but we still done our best with them in terms of massage, mobility, doing a bit of breathing with them to desensitize the respiratory system, various other bits. And again, with that as well, I've been very fortunate to have a good relationship with the S&C on that side. And I think that's really important that the medical and S&C work well together.
Yeah, definitely. We might touch on that a bit later on. Now, obviously, talking about that team environment and the challenges of working with athletes in a team environment, how do you find that differs to, obviously, you've got your own clinic. How do you balance, or what's the difference, I guess, between clinic and team environment?
Yeah, I think it's probably the personalities are a little bit different in rugby. I think you have to, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast or not, but yeah, you have to take some shit and give some shit, you know, and the banter of rugby, you know, and to be honest, it's something that I love. I've never played rugby. I was always playing Gaelic football and hurling at home, and I only got in, I got into rugby just through placements and stuff, but I love it. I love the camaraderie and the kind of the personalities that you see. You've got chalk and cheese personalities there, but it's a pretty intimidating environment to go into initially. But you know, once you get to know the lads and stuff like that, then you know, you kind of you sleep with one eye open, or you're treating with one eye looking behind you in case what's coming behind you and stuff. But I think once you can get over that, you know, the majority of lads, they're good banter, and they do anti-fear. They're highly motivated athletes, which I think helps. And probably to go back and answer the question, I think sometimes you have to hold them back, you know, from going too quickly. Whereas in private practice, maybe you're trying to push somebody on and try to get them to crack on a little bit. Whereas usually with rugby lads, it's like they want to do too much too quickly, rather than the opposite in private practice.
Yeah, cool. Now, I guess this question you can kind of pull on experiences from clinic and team environment as well. And it's how do you deal with exercise adherence once you've kind of given athletes, you know, some correctives or whatever to do? How do you try and make sure they adhere to that when if it's a clinic environment, when they go off home, or a player where they're, you know, onto other things, as you know, that the team environment's quite fast paced and you might not get a lot of hands-on time with them. How do you kind of try and keep them accountable?
Yeah, so I like to try to get the biggest bang for a buck. So what I'll usually do is before training, I'll literally get them in. I know like Bob Stewart, I don't know if you've come across him. He's one of the world's most experienced rugby physios. You know, it's great to work with him day in, day out in camp and stuff. And he's one that's very much, you know, he wants the players to take responsibility and stuff like that. And I think that's really good. I'm probably the other side of it, where I'll go, right, I fucking want you in here at this time to do this and this. So I probably try to control the players a little bit to answer your question, which I don't think's the only way to do it. I don't think it's the best way, but that's just the way I've done it. Whereas, as I said, Bob, who's world class physio, does the complete opposite. So there's no right or wrong is probably the point I'm trying to make. But I'm very much right in here at 20 minutes before the session. I want you to do this and this for me. And if the player doesn't come in, then I tend to give him a bit of shit about it, or you know, or kind of pull him up on it a bit. And I find that's the best way is get him, you know, use that pre-training time to get everything and use it as a graded exposure to get everything ready for what it's about to undergo in training. So that's usually the most beneficial time is pre-training. And then obviously in the evenings, you know, if you want to get a little bit more load into them, then you know, we do that around our gyms. On at the equal level, I think that's where it kind of goes into what they do in the gym. It needs to really reinforce what you're trying to do with them. Because if you're just trying to do something with them, you know, that's going completely against what they're doing in the gym, then, you know, you're just trying to shovel, you know, shit up a hill, basically, so to speak. So it's, for me, it all goes back to what the S&C are doing, what the physios are doing. You know, are we all singing from the same hymn sheet and trying to get to the player to the same place? And I think if you can get that, then they're getting a lot of good stimulus throughout the day. So they might get it with me pre-training. The S&C and the warm-up are, you know, they're reinforcing the same good stuff that we're trying to do with the player. And then when they get into the gym after the session, you know, like we talk a lot about foot pressures and stuff like that. You know, are they reinforcing good movement in the gym? Are they decelerating well on the field. So it's not one specific thing. It's kind of a whole combination of things that I think is really important to help the player get resilience and durability.
Yeah, that's great stuff, and like, it keeps coming up, and it's that relationship between yourselves, the medical team, and the S&C team. Over the years in different environments, I'm sure it's been different. What types of arrangements have you seen, and what's your what would you think would be the best way of building that relationship between S&C and medical?
Yeah, I think I think the first thing is, I suppose, the philosophies of what you're trying to achieve. I think it's important to understand, and I think, if I'm being honest, I think it's probably more physio, ego, sometimes in one regard, and then other times you might have an S&C ego problem. But I think usually it's any problems I have seen is where us as physios, we try to get probably a little bit too traditional. Whereas then the S&C will probably go, it's just about strength. So I think you're kind of getting this hybrid of therapists and hybrid of S&C now that work well together, where S&C are starting to appreciate movement a little bit more and the importance of moving well rather than just putting weight on the bar. And physio are appreciating more now about, it's not just about isolating muscles, it's actually about getting the athlete moving well and working smarter, not harder. Because if they move well in the gym and they move well on the field, then I'm going to be a lot quieter in the evenings, rather than them moving like crap in the gym, crap on the field, and then I'm ultimately trying to sort it out in the evenings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that is the general thing. It's difficult because physio and S&C go through completely different educational processes, and then there's a lot of miscommunication, like different terminology and things like that. But like you said, there's more people who are kind of that hybrid between the two that are kind of helping bridge that gap, and just like I say, good environments where people can work together well. So I think you're right there. Now this is a question we get.
Jamie as well. I'm a big believer as well on lifting heavy and putting some stuff on the bar. And I think the one thing that really surprised me in working with the rugby union this year was how much the players were lifting. But the big thing was with the S&C is that they made sure the players lifted well. Yeah. So I've got no issues with players lifting heavy once they lift well, and and I think that's really refreshing to see, as well as just because you've got S&C guys who are into movement, you can still have both where you can still get them strong, but they move well under high loads. I think that's really, really important, and I think that does us physios a massive favour if you've got an S&C like that. I think that's invaluable. Yeah,
definitely. I think you're right. Physios like to see an S&C who understands that the players need to move well as having that load, but then S&Cs like to see a physio who appreciates the load, whether it's in the gym or out on the pitch as well. So that's a really good point. Now, this next question we ask all the guests on the podcast, and it's always interesting when we get a physio's kind of perspective on it, and it's, what do you think is the biggest mistake rugby players make when it comes to strength and conditioning?
Yeah, good question. I'm just thinking I give some players some shit sometimes for doing some stuff. But I think a lot of that as well can be kind of almost they get brainwashed into the environments that they're in. So I think a lot of it needs to be what feels good for you. And, I don't have all the answers by any means, but I think a lot of players, they'll just kind of accept for the sake of doing it, whereas actually if they do something and it doesn't make them feel good, or it gives you a tight back or it gives you a tight hamstring, then that's your brain telling you something. Now, I'm not saying that just because you get something feels tight or fatigued, that's fine as well, but I think it's learning to see what works well for you. And that's something I encourage all players to do, is it's not just about doing 3 sets of 6 of this on a certain day. There's going to be some days when you don't sleep well, or you wake up and you feel a little bit more tight. That's where you have to do 6 sets of it or 7 sets of it. And it's not about just following 3 sets of 6 or 3 sets of 10 of pre-ab or movement prep or whatever we're calling it. It's about you getting your body in the right state and you feeling in the right state to ultimately get ready to train and go out there and perform. And I think, as I said, I think a lot of athletes, they just kind of get up, they rock up, and they think, okay, it's I can just go out there today and do what I always do. Whereas it's when that accumulative load kicks in, and it's when kind of what I call non-physical stressors, where lifestyle stuff gets in the way. That might be a contract, that might be a lack of sleep, it might be a new baby. That's when these things kind of bite you in the ass, really. So it's having an awareness of what makes you feel good, how you like to feel before you get out into training, and then kind of adapting your movement prep to that. And as I said, one day it might take a few minutes, another day you might need to take 15-20 minutes to get ready to train.
Yeah, cool. Great advice. You've talked about movement prep there. What's your opinion on, or how much do you value movement screening, especially when you're working with large squads? And I guess what's your approach to it? Like, if you could only look at three things, what would they be?
Yeah, it's funny actually. I've just released. I didn't even tell us. I've just released a book. I haven't even advertised it yet, to be honest, but it's on Amazon. It's called Injury Prevention. I can't remember the book. How bad's that? I can't remember what I call it. Injury Prevention for Team Sports. And I cover pre-season screening, and that actually, it's funny what you just mentioned that. But what I cover in the book is I screen about 25 athletes in about 2 hours. So the biggest mistake I've made, and I see, is we spend like 45 minutes with athletes. We do all these intricate measurements, and then we put all that data in a filing cabinet. We never use it again. So my kind of approach with movement screening is, right, if I could get 3 or 4 movements from a physio point of view that I can use when an athlete has an injury later on in the season, and that's going to be really useful data to have a look at. So something as simple as a knee to wall exercise for ankle mobility, there is some research on that, on injury prediction and how we land and stuff like that. So I think that's a useful test. And then obviously you've got your daily monitoring scores you can use that with. Something like a sit and reach or a toe touch test or something like that, and a adductor squeeze. They're useful things that can be replicated throughout the season. Then I'd be looking at, my next question then is, right, what's the athlete going to do in pre-season? So a big mistake that I talk about in the book is actually preparing your screen for pre-season, whereas a lot of people, I think, they look at the demands of rugby and they go, right, I'm going to do my pre-season screening for rugby, whereas actually in pre-season training in rugby, you do anything but rugby, really. You do strongman stuff, you do crazy, stuff. You do lifts that you probably don't do a whole lot in season. So for me, it's right, what 3 or 4 key lifts are you going to be doing a lot of in the gym? And then I'd almost do a body weight version of them, and then see, right, have you got the actual mobility to get into these positions? Can you actually do these positions without increasing load? And can you manage your base of support? So that's another thing that I would do as well. So I'd use maybe 1 or 2. If I pick 3, I'd probably do the adductor squeeze, the knee to wall, and I'd probably look at them, maybe do a squat, a body weight squat, or a deadlift or something like that, just to see how they're moving generally.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I like that kind of bang for your buck and things that can cover a few different outcomes, but also, like you said, can consider what you're screening them for at the stage of the season. That's interesting. Okay, next question. I'm losing my way a little bit because I'm jumping around. So yeah, a lot of our athletes, Rugby Renegade, amateur rugby players. What would your, obviously then they don't have as good access to medical care as professionals. So what would your advice be around kind of initial acute injury management?
I think do the basics well. I know the evidence is a bit sketchy. I'm a big believer in ice. So again, like if you've got an ankle injury, get it in a basin of water. I prefer that to an ice pack. So just get a basin of ice cold water, put some ice in the water, and keep your ankle covered. So the immersion of the water, I think, is probably almost as beneficial as the temperature. Obviously, if it's not an ankle, then ice packs and stuff will do initially. And then I think the biggest thing is you need to try to get moving as quickly as you can. So presuming that there's no serious pathology there. It's trying to get load into the tissues in a safe, progressive manner. So again, we know from research with motor adaptations that your body initially, when you have pain or you have an injury, it's going to try to avoid loading the area. And the problem with that is then when the pain goes, is sometimes your brain doesn't necessarily go back to the way that it did before the injury, that it continues to overload or avoid loading that area. Or said another way, overload a different part of your body, which is why then, maybe 1, 2, 3 months down the line, you pick up a soft tissue injury or something like that. Or certainly that's kind of my interpretation of the literature. But I think it's important that we show your brain that it's safe to put load through those areas as safely as possible in that graded exposure manner. And again, I'm a big believer in kind of using whole body movements rather than just trying to isolate muscles. Because again, it's an ankle injury is a brain injury, and we really have to think of it like that, where if you roll your ankle, the first thing you do is you start limping, where you put your weight on the outside of your foot. You avoid loading your big toe, because when you press through your big toe, that's going to engage your peroneals, which is going to put stress through the ATFL that you've probably rolled. So again, it's giving your brain back the ability to push well through your toe, because that's going to be very important for you when you go back out there and you have to sprint or you have to accelerate. What we don't want is your brain still avoiding really pushing off your big toe when it needs to. So I think things like that are really important, just to get the load back. And I keep it very simple. I put people in a position where your brain has no choice but to tolerate that load. But I think you need to do that at the right stages. So one of the big things that I'm a big believer in is getting everything doing its job. So things like, sit to stand, even when you're getting up off a chair. I see a lot of athletes, they push through their heels or they push through their toes when they squat. Whereas I think a big thing that we need to do is actually push through our midfoot. So when you get up from a chair, I cue a lot of athletes to squash an orange. So when you squash an orange through your midfoot, kind of where your laces start all the way down towards your toes, what you do is you plantar flex the foot, so you're getting your gastro, your hamstring, your quad and your glute working well. Whereas when you push through your heels on the way up from a squat, you're generating a dorsiflexion moment at the ankle, which is actually taking your gastro and your hamstrings off tension, so to speak, if you really exaggerated it. So that's going to affect how your knee works, which is going to affect how your hip works. So some simple cues like that, where you push through the midfoot, I think gets all of the muscles working together, and it starts to reassure your brain that it's safe, stuff like that. And I think pain is useful, but sometimes it can hang around a little bit longer than it needs to as well. So it's not always the best indicator of true damage, whereas swelling and stuff like that, although that can overreact as well, then you'll get a good gauge of kind of where your body and your brain is thinking about this injury in terms of how quick that stuff tends to disappear.
Yeah, some great advice. I think there's a lot of research, or there is some research coming out about the kind of pain response that we still don't quite understand. So I guess what would be, following on from what you were saying, how do you deal with players when you're coming back? Those first initial running sessions where they're going to experience some pain. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, great question. So like my approach would be, I try to get the player into a situation where every progression we wouldn't have pain. So I try to keep them like at a certain level until we can tolerate that load, and then progressing to the next level. So for instance, I don't, and again, this is just me. This isn't the only way to do it, but I'm a big fan of getting players to go through a lot of progress. If we can hop on one leg and we can hop and stick, and we can hop on one leg over 10 meters, and then we can increase the speed of those hops, then you're putting a lot of load through that leg before you've actually run. So then the first time we run, you've actually tolerated a little bit more load through the tissues and a little bit more rate of force development than you probably would have with your jogging. So I super maximally load the tissues in a certain way so that we never get to that point. But I think to kind of go back and answer that question, I think you're going to know yourself if it's a sensation. if it's a little bit unpleasant versus it's a sharp shooting pain and it's like it's taking your breath away and it's telling you to stop, then I think you need to listen to that. So I think it's trusting your gut as well a lot. And you know, I am a big believer in kind of listening to the player and kind of gauging with them, you know, what they're kind of saying and what I'm seeing. And I think usually you'll be able to kind of correlate the two pretty well if that kind of answers the question, which I don't think it did.
No, it definitely does. I think I guess you need to be aware that there is going to be some sort of sensation, not necessarily pain, and sometimes the players will kind of refer that as pain or communicate that as pain. But I like what you said about having the progressions there, because, like you say, you're almost reinforcing the motor patterns without loading too heavily, but you're also preparing them for the next step. You know, it's kind of a double whammy. I guess it's my next question would be, like, you know, injuries are a pretty horrible thing for players, because, you know, the last thing they would be doing is more training. They're there to play. How do you kind of deal with the kind of psychological side of things, that trying to keep players motivated, especially with long-term injuries, I guess?
Yeah, really good question, and it's hard. I think that's probably where the relationship with the player becomes pretty important, and I think you need to appreciate, as a therapist or an S&C, we need to appreciate kind of that players have up and down days. Some days they're good, some days it gets to them, and you know when to push them and push the buttons, and you know when to back off a little bit. So I think that's really important in terms of trying to understand, and you know, even it goes back, like, I'm just thinking in Japan and stuff, like, where the S&C and the physios, you know, someone might tip you up that the player said something in the gym that day, or something's happened, or at home, and you know they've had bad news or whatever, you know, just as an example, not saying that happened, but and kind of being able to adapt your program from that. Now, how I overcome a lot of it, and what I think helps, is that your rehab and your gym sessions, that what makes players feel like players is it goes back to them feeling like they've worked hard. So, you know, we used to joke a little bit about, you know, and a few players have said to me that my rehab sessions will be harder than some of the sessions they would have done in the gym and stuff like that. So again, we make the rehab challenging and make them feel like they've worked, and make it tough and stimulate their nervous system, so it keeps them completely engaged in the program. I think there's nothing worse than if you're having a shit day and you go in and, you know, I'm giving you 3 sets of 10 of clamshells or glute bridges. It's not going to stimulate you enough, whereas you almost want to get into the session. And again, that kind of goes back to my point of giving your brain no option but to tolerate the load, where your focus and attention has to come onto that drill, otherwise you're not going to be successful with it. And that's kind of the art of the rehab exercise, so to speak. So I think you can overcome a lot of it by getting the basic, you know, adrenaline and getting the endorphins hitting of doing a hard session. And I think sometimes they can kind of come out the other end of that and feel like they've worked and feel happy, and it goes back as well to that. Well, just thinking back to when players came in a shit mood and then they left in a good mood. A lot of that is kind of giving them stuff that they can be successful with as well. So, you know, that they've done something today that they couldn't do yesterday, but giving them like just small goals to hit, and the player being kind of clear on where they are in the rehab process as well. I think that's very important as well, that they're clear on what they need to do in order to progress to the next level and the next level. Yeah.
That's cool. No, great advice. Thanks for that. And now let's just pull a bit, kind of your personal experience. Just chat about the Japan World Cup. Obviously, you know, amazing event to be part of, and also, yeah, arguably the best England performance ever. And then obviously disappointment losing to what was a very good South African side. What's your overall sort of feelings from the tournament?
Yeah, it's just obviously you're probably gutted for the players that, you know, that we weren't able to put the performance in the final, because, you know, I've seen how hard they all worked. It was very, very similar to the 2017 World Cup, where as a group, I think that was the thing that was special, was how close a group we were. staff and players, and how everyone worked together. There was no egos. It was just everyone working hard, working towards the same goal, and that's quite special feeling when you get that in sport. And I don't think you get that in club rugby as much, because it's not sustainable, I think, to be that focused and that in tune for such a long period. Whereas obviously in a World Cup, it's like, it's 6 or 8 weeks, and then obviously the pre thing. So it's kind of, you can kind of do that for that period of time. And that was similar in the World Cup in Australia, as well as the group of players and the staff. We had a special bond, and everyone was just working and moving in the same direction. And when you kind of get that, you're living with these people for 8 weeks non-stop. Well, it was a lot longer than that, with the pre-World Cup camps down in London and stuff like that. But I don't think there was ever a day where you're like, fucking hell, this is crap. It was like, right, yeah, you have your ups and downs. Obviously, you miss your kids and stuff, but everyone was working well together. And I think that's the most disappointing thing for me, is that we couldn't finish it off for the bond of the group that we had. I know obviously it's an international team, and they're representing their families and the country and stuff like that, but internal in the group, a lot of people take the piss. I'm Irish. There's loads of staff from various other countries as well. I've sold my soul to the Queen. That's what it's telling me. But for me, it's just a group that it was a special group, and it's all about the group. You know what I mean? It's not, I'm Irish. That's England or anything like that. It's the group of players and the staff that you get to work with. It's people at the end of the day. If that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm sure it was a great experience. Yeah, I know obviously Bob Stewart's Scottish. Joe Lewis is Welsh, so yeah, tons of traitors. No, all good. And I guess this would be interesting to hear from you. We've kind of talked about relationships between physios and S&C, and what constitutes a good S&C, I suppose, and what advice would you give to an upcoming strength coach?
Yeah, great question. Really, I think not to fall in love, not to try to be a physio, I think is probably the first thing I'm going to say, where they either fall into that trap of trying to be a physio and forget about getting athletes strong. And then I would say also, don't try to be a kind of a meathead S&C where it's just like, wait. I think it's trying to get something in the middle of that, where you appreciate movement, but you appreciate the fundamentals that you're taught in the uni, and try to get the balance of that. I think you need to get really good with your cues, and that's the same for physios. To be fair, I'd probably give this advice to everyone, physio and S&C. It's just obviously physio, I would say don't go too traditional, but I think cues, getting really good at cueing athletes and being able to see stuff and change how athletes are moving with your words, I think is a really powerful skill to have, and keeping it simple where you're not over cueing either. I think appreciating deceleration. I think getting comfortable coaching deceleration and looking at deceleration, I think is really, really important. And I think it's probably one of the most undervalued skills that an S&C has in terms of preventing injuries. And I think it's a big cause of issues and niggles and all silly injuries, as I like to call them. So I get really comfortable with that stuff as well, rather than just being all about sprinting and lifting as much weight as you can. It's actually the ability to decelerate your body weight and change direction, I think, is critical.
Okay, so on that, what do you look for in deceleration in your players?
Yeah, so like for me, deceleration, it all comes down to having your body weight in a good position for the next step. So again, I like players to accel and then to decel into a split squat position. Now, what I'm looking for there is obviously and for your listeners, your rugby players, that position that you're going to get into, if you're about to hit a rugby bag, you naturally get into that position anyway, don't you? So when you go to hit a rugby bag, you know the way you dip your hips and you get your weight on your midfoot, so you get ready to drive through the bag. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. So that's a very similar position to what I want you to be able to get into when you decelerate, because when you're in that position, if you imagine you get into that position but don't drive through, you're in your body feels strong, and then, but not only that, when you finish in that position, you've got what I call movement options, where you can accelerate forward through the bag, sorry, you can sidestep, or you can twist and go backwards, or you could even backpedal if you needed to. So the step that you get into in deceleration, you put your body in a good position where you've got movement options for the next step, because it's always about the next step. And for me, I just keep deceleration simple. It's the ability to put your body in a position that's efficient for then being successful for the next step. So I'm a big fan of just doing some accel decels and then being able to stick that position. And then it's usually when you stick that position, that's where the learning happens. So a lot of athletes, when I do drills with them at the start, they stick it and then they get out of it straight away. Whereas I can't even see if it was a good position, because it's happened so fast. So I'm like, right, hold that position for me. And then I'll ask them the question, right, are you in a good position to sidestep, to rotate, to pivot, to accel, to decel, or to go backwards? And what they'll have to do then is they'll have to think about it, and then they'll naturally shift their body weight ever so slightly to then feel like they're in a good position to do that. So that's where the learning occurs then, where they can actually go, right, this is what it should feel like to get into this position. And then usually after 2 or 3 reps, they'll pick that up quite quickly then. Because deceleration and being, getting into good positions, it's all about having that sensory awareness of what it feels like. So I think that's important as well when they do the drills, is to actually stick the position and then ask yourself the question, am I in a good position here? Am I in a good position to hit a bag? Am I in a good position to sidestep? Or am I in a good position to re-accelerate or twist and turn? If that kind of makes sense. It's kind of hard to describe it over a podcast.
I really like that. And I know, like, working with Bob Stewart many years ago, I could be wrong, but I think he did or learned a bit from Bill Knowles, the kind of knee expert, and a lot of stuff he did was, and he was kind of saying, we do loads of stuff on acceleration, but we don't, and in terms of returning from injury, we don't do deceleration as well. And like a lot of his drills would have a forced deceleration at the end, and, like say, maintain that good position. So I don't know if that's where he got it from, or just through experience. But and also, like, I'm sure coaches were like that players are always getting or are comfortable at getting in that position to then react, because I always say, like, rugby's about decision making, and if you're not in the right position to make good decisions, then that's half the battle. So I really like that. And then going back to the advice for upcoming strength coaches or physios, are there any books or resources you recommend? Obviously you've mentioned your books, you can give that a good plug now if you want.
Yeah, I actually forgot about that. So I published it, but then all this stuff happened, so I didn't announce it yet, because we were going to do a course on the back of it, so I didn't bother. But so that book's probably for strength coaches. That's Injury Prevention for Team Sports. I think it's called How to Implement a World-Class Injury Prevention System Without Expensive Equipment. I think that's what I called it. And in that book, I talk a lot about movement. So again, everything we've talked about today, motor adaptations to pain. I cover like the big key lifts in the gym and how to lift well with good foot pressures, and then how to do movement prep and stuff. So that's probably a decent book. That all my books that I write, it's about helping the therapist or the S&C coach to implement it in the real world. So I don't go too heavy on the theory. I have references in it, but it's all, for me, it's more important that the person can take that information and implement it. So even your listeners who maybe aren't S&C coaches would probably get value from that. I've got a book called Beating Back Pain Without Pills, Injections and Surgery. So that's aimed at a therapist or at a patient with back pain. So again, if any of your rugby players have back pain, that's probably a decent book to pick up. And again, that goes through some of the kind of the foot pressures and how to squat and split squat and stuff like that. And then for anyone kind of that wants the return physio, we call it, that's my website to go to, physio.com, and that kind of runs through my 12-step return to play system that I use. So that's my books. Sorry, I feel like I've just bombarded that question with my own stuff. I like shameless, but I like Franz Bosch's book. That's a really good one, Strength Training Coordination for S&C. Again, I see my stuff as like a prerequisite to his stuff. And again, I think that's why we work well with the S&C. Is a lot of my rehab exercises, they're based on his principles, but I find his exercises are quite high level.
Right.
So my exercises are kind of the steps before that to have the athlete an ability to do those exercises well. So his stuff's influenced me a lot. Bill Knowles definitely would have influenced me a lot as well with the deceleration stuff in the past. There's a guy, James Radcliffe, I think he is his name. He's got a book out. Jim Radcliffe, I think it is. He had a decent book out as well. He's kind of the same cohort of like that Vern Gambetta kind of, those kind of guys. Yeah. I like all of that stuff. A little bit of opinionated Vern Gambetta, but I think a lot of the stuff that they teach is decent. I think that they're probably the best S&C books I've come across. Triphasic Training. That's a really good book.
Yep.
I've implemented a lot of his stuff in my rehab approach as well, and I know the S&C guys at England use a lot of his stuff. Cal Dietz, he's a really good guy, and he probably, all his biases kind of fit with mine as well. So that's probably another good book that I'd recommend.
Cool. And then lastly, Dave, where can people learn more about you?
So for physio, so I mentor a lot of physios, and they can find a lot of information on www.thegotofysio.com. And if even if you're rugby players or anything like that, if they go to that site, if you look at my blogs, you'll have to go back a bit. But there's quite a few exercises there where I talk about sprinting and the need for a co-contraction at the knee, and the importance of the midfoot when you do bridges and stuff like that, and basically to get off your heel and get onto your midfoot. So there's probably quite a few things there that S&C rugby players and physios might find interesting. And then my clinic, if anyone is around me, it's prosportphysio.com. So prosportphysio.com. That's the clinical site.
Awesome. Of course, we'll share links to those websites and your books in the show notes. But Dave, thank you for, like I say, spending the time with us to chat through your experience, some great take-home points there for our listeners, and just all the best through this strange time.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Awesome stuff. A great insight into what must have been a roller coaster World Cup, and of course some really good takeaways about movement screening, injury prevention and rehab. So thank you, Dave. All the best in the future. Thanks for coming on and talking to us. In the meantime, guys, please stay tuned. Subscribe to us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, whatever you use, Spotify maybe for podcasts, and of course give us a 5-star review, and keep checking us out on the social media channels, Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, and of course at rugbyrenegade.com. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.